So within the next couple of weeks, we set up an LLC, set up a business bank account, bought the guy's quote for $500, watched through it A to Z, did exactly what he said, found suppliers on Alibaba, and then launched a product. And we did private label because we just didn't know that arbitrage was a thing. We didn't even know you could
wild
with it. So that's literally the only reason we
E-commerce is the greatest business opportunity of our generation.
Hey, what's going on, people? Kaj here, just letting you know today's episode is an interview that I did on SellerSnap's podcast. SellerSnap is the repricer that we use in our business, an AI-based repricer that avoids price wars, keeps you in the buy box longer, and increases profit. So they're sponsoring today's episode, obviously, as I'm reposting the interview that I did on their podcast about our business journey and what we've learned and how we are approaching Amazon in 2024. Enjoy.
This is not another Ecom podcast. I'm Ian Kaneshiro. On this episode, we have Kaja Robinson with us, a trailblazer in the e-commerce space who started selling in 2017 and has mastered various business models such as private label, online arbitrage, retail arbitrage, and wholesale. Kaja currently focuses on brand direct strategies, scaling operations to an impressive 8-figure mark. Kaja's journey is about innovation and partnership. And through his company, he collaborates directly with brands to amplify their presence on Amazon and guides Amazon sellers as they transition from the arbitrage to the wholesale strategies, empowering them to build sustainable and real businesses. So Kaja, thanks for joining us on today's episode.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Before we kind of kick us off and learn a little bit about, the different business models that you kind of operate, is there anything else that you'd like to, let us know about yourself or for our audience?
Yeah, well, I'll say that we are growing towards 8 figures. I'm not an 8-figure seller yet, but we hit 7 figures in 2023 and I'm always thinking big. So I remember when we first started, it was like, how do we get to 6 figures? And that felt impossible. And then it was, how do we get to 7 figures? And that felt impossible. And then now it's 8 figures, which actually doesn't feel as impossible as 7 figures did. The longer you've been in the game and you surround yourself with other people who are doing big things, you start to think big.
I love that. And so in terms of that transition from 6 to 7 and then 7 to 8, does which gap feels wider? Because essentially it's the same amount of...
The 6 to 7 felt way bigger than how 7 to 8 feels. Because it's like you don't have, at that point we didn't have a clear pathway. Now I know how to get there. But I mean, I clearly remember the most excited I've ever been for a sales milestone was when we hit 100,000 in sales for trailing 12 months. Me and my business partner, we were just stoked. And obviously, when you're doing that at Ecom, especially when you're selling physical stuff, you didn't actually make that much money when you sold 100,000. But that was like a huge proof of concept moment for us when we realized that this could really become something.
Well, I mean, that, hitting the 100,000 mark is, for people to listen to this episode, the 100,000 mark might seem like, a world away. And so, if you could kind of go back in time and think about yourself when you're a quarter of the way there, you just hit, $10, $20, $50,000 now. And you're like, now I'm halfway to 1,000. What would you tell yourself, as your next milestone was that 100,000 mark?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was, when we hit 100,000, we were at that point still doing mostly private label. So it was, most of that revenue was from one product. We had a variation of it as well, but most of it was from one listing. And at that point, we weren't even really aware of the arbitrage model, and we were still completely bootstrapped. So we had funded the business ourselves. All profits were being 100% reinvested into the business. And so when you're growing that way and you're doing private label, and you have to order containers of products at a time, it was just a lot more difficult to scale quickly. And then when we kind of pivoted to arbitrage, I mean, I see people now who hit 100K in sales doing arbitrage in 2 or 3 months, which just blows my mind because of how long it took us to get there, But yeah, when you think big and you take big action, you'd be so shocked at what's possible.
That's actually quite interesting that you're saying that you started with the private label model, because oftentimes I speak to sellers who, start with the arbitrage, move into wholesale, and then they kind of gradually progress into private?
We did it backwards.
Talk me through that decision. It's 2017. You're like, I'm going to sell on Amazon, and you haven't even heard about arbitrage, so you jump straight into private label?
Yes. So me and my business partner, Josh, we had done some business, a couple side hustles in high school. We kind of had the itch. At 2017, we were still both in college at that point. And we were honestly just trying to figure out like what we could kind of do on the side. Because it's like, okay, we know that there's other ways to make money besides just getting a job. And why not just go for it? And so as the story goes, Josh sent me a YouTube video of a guy doing private label. He was like, yo, I think we can do this. I watched the video and I was like, I think we can. So within the next couple of weeks, we set up an LLC, set up a business bank account, bought the guy's course for $500, watched through it A to Z, did exactly what he said, found suppliers on Alibaba, and then launched a product. And we did private label because we just didn't know that arbitrage was a thing. We didn't even know you could
wild
with it. So that's literally the only reason we started private label.
And so that is absolutely wild. I love the fact that you guys just went all in and kind of believed in yourself, invested in yourself, and said, we're going to do it. And you ended up going with, I imagine being like the harder of the business models and being rather successful at it. Like, would you suggest like taking that approach to go jumping into private label without knowing anything about Amazon? Because Amazon is so much more than just having product or getting product. Anyone can get product, but like, there's the whole logistic aspect of inbound shipping and then dealing with, inventory health and everything. Talk me through that learning process of doing that with private label, especially with items that you still have so much work to do from the optimization side.
Yeah. So no, I would not recommend people start private label unless if you have a business background and you know the brand that you're trying to build. If you already know the brand that you're building, or you have a brand someone else and you're bringing it on Amazon, like 100% go private label. But if you don't have a business background and you're trying to get into it as a side hustle and then possibly scale it up, don't start private label. But for us, it was an awesome learning experience.
Sure.
Because we learned about product research, we learned about listing optimization, we learned about keywords, we learned about PPC, we learned everything about Amazon. So then when we transitioned into arbitrage, our learning curve was not steep compared to the person who's just starting arbitrage because we already understood the game.
Yeah.
And fast forward to today, as we're partnering directly with brands, I wouldn't even say we really built like a big brand. We launched 2 different products and their branding wasn't similar. But we've launched products and we understand how to launch a product. We understand PPC, we understand all that stuff. So now when we're approaching a brand and saying, hey, we want to have an exclusive relationship, we actually know what we're talking about when it comes to your listing isn't good. This is how we would optimize it. We can run PPC, so on and so forth.
Yeah. So, I understand that one of the many things that you do revolves around approaching brands that are already, companies that are doing business, either in brick or mortar or on other channels, and bringing them into the Amazon space. So it was actually kind of a blessing in disguise, right? That you took the road less traveled to get in, and then you kind of parlayed that into, really your unique proposition to Amazon selling to these brands.
Yep, 100%. And yeah, if we had started arbitrage, I think we would be like 2 to 3x as big as we are right now. But at the same time, I don't regret doing private label because it gives us that competitive edge on the knowledge side.
Right. Well, I mean, let's be real. We all operate in, in this Amazon ecosystem. We see the YouTube videos and we see the TikToks and the Instagram, and there is a lot of this talk about, 6, 7, 8 figures and doing this and doing that. But what we don't always remember, and I think people that are new to the game don't realize, is that those, 6, 7, 8 figures isn't all in your pocket and doesn't necessarily mean you're even in the black, you're even making money. And so the difference between the arbitrage and the private label spaces in terms of profit margin is night and day, because you'll see arbitrageurs and wholesalers making, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. But, if you make $100,000 and, like we were talking about at the beginning of this episode, and you have a 20% margin on your cost of goods, you only got 20K in the bank. And that doesn't even start to cover, some of the other things that you have to pay for that is not in the cost of goods sold.
100%. And that's assuming, right, that you're selling 100% of your inventory all the time, which is also not the case. So then your cash flow also is going to impact how much profit's staying in the bank.
Right.
All things that we learned the hard way.
And no returns. And
yeah, exactly.
It just depends. No callbacks from Amazon, and no disposal orders, no long-term storage fees. The list goes on. And I think that one of the things that I love about this space is that it's so accessible. But what but like what makes me feel bad about people that are new to the space is that they see this kind of like this gold rush, right? Like in California in the 1800s, that they're like, oh, I'm going to strike gold, but they don't realize that it's a grind. It's an actual grind. And like these businesses that are making $100,000, again, are not making $100,000 in their pocket necessarily.
Right. Yeah, totally. It's like, it is a gold rush though, but like you said, it is a grind. And I think that's one thing that I've realized, because 2014, we've been running this business for almost 7 years now, which is wild to think about. It's like we're kind of like veterans now compared to how long other people have been selling. There's still so much opportunity in the space, right? Certain niches of selling on Amazon or e-commerce might get saturated, right? Like the Nikes, the Adidas, the low-hanging fruit. But even now, as like we're transitioning to doing more stuff directly with brands, that particular niche is so underserved, so underserved. And even now, one thing I'm noticing is there are a lot of private label brands that are trying to exit or trying to find wholesalers for their private label. Because you have a lot of people who around the same time as us started getting into private label, scaled their brands, but now they're pivoting into starting different brands, into other businesses. Maybe they're moving into real estate, but their brand is still good. They just don't have the bandwidth or don't want to, manage all the details. So then there's another space there, kind of like how, baby boomers are selling their plumbing businesses, their electrical businesses, and no one wants to buy them. There are all these private label people who are exiting and trying to move on from their brands, but are looking for someone to partner with. So there's always going to be opportunity in the space because it's still growing faster than people are coming in. But sometimes that the low-hanging fruit might be what gets squeezed out a little bit where there isn't as much profit. But if you can grind through that first phase and then scale up and provide actual value to the marketplace, there's so much opportunity.
Yeah, I totally hear that. And it's, I guess, the marketplace so much more. And you're saying that there's all these brands that are looking for exits, but, we're kind of 2-3 years past this whole, remember this like Thrasio thing that was happening a couple of years ago, where every aggregator, like every company became an aggregator, and was trying to roll up brands. And then all of a sudden, like we don't see them very much anymore.
And that's part of why.
Okay.
Because I think when people saw that happening, there were a lot of, and again, this is just me observing. This isn't like I did detailed research.
It's speculation. We can speculate.
But I think there were a lot of people who saw that happening who were in the beginning phases of building their brand. And then they started building their brand in such a way to exit it. And then now they're at a point where they can exit, but the market has shifted, right? So they built something exitable that they want to exit, but they're not getting the multiple they would have gotten, 3 years ago.
Interesting. And they're not so interested in putting in the work and, doing, more product development and more brand development and trying to, scale it that way.
Yep.
In terms of, this is kind of out of interest, one of the things that my friends make fun of me for this, I love like gadgets and gear.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Like, you can catch me on REI, like finding camping gear. I go camping. I used to go camping, 2-3 times a year. Now I'm lucky to get out once a year, if that, but I love the outdoors. I love all the gadgets, and my friends make fun of me for it. So I'm always onto these like obscure companies that will do things like a solar powered lantern, or I got this really like rad, like foldable chair that has these pistons on it.
Okay.
That makes it like a
chair.
Chair.
I've seen those. Yeah.
And they're just sick, but there's like these really, kind of end up being like obscure brands that, maybe I caught in an outdoor magazine or on Instagram or something, and I go out and buy. And so my question after this long-winded thing, my question is, when we're talking about operating private label brands or consulting for private label brands, where does, your business and your expertise lie in terms of these brands? Is it like the development process from, zero to launch? Or is it like these brands that are already finding ways to gather business in other places but aren't on Amazon yet?
Right. Yeah. I'm not looking really for brands that are going zero to launch. I'm looking for brands that already have some performance, even if it's not on Amazon. Like maybe they've done well on Shopify or they've done well on TikTok Shop, but there's already some proof of concept that the market wants their product and that their product is good. So I'm looking for a brand that's already done the product development part and has a good product that the market wants. Then it's like, okay, what does your online presence look like? So if I'm going after a brand that's maybe not private label that already has other resellers, the main thing I'm looking for is, can I immediately provide additional value to this brand that's not just buying their product to resell? So are their listings terrible? Is there one picture? Are there only two pictures? Are they not optimized? Is their title super short? Are their bullet points super short? Are they not maximizing their keyword optimization? Are they not running people? Like if those simple things that a brand can do are not being done, then I know within a month we can drastically improve their sales, their revenue, their profit on a platform like Amazon. And another thing is, if they're doing well on Amazon and they're not on TikTok Shop, they're not on Walmart, then we can also help get them onto those other channels. And then with a private label brand, it's interesting because the ones that I've talked to and one of the ones I'm working with now, their issue normally just comes down to staying in stock and logistics. So they're looking for a wholesaler to help buy their product in bulk, so that way they're not going in and out of stock. Or they've already optimized, they're already running good PPC, but they just want someone else to manage it for them. And they, again, want to increase their cash flow. So they're like, look, our listings are good. We're not looking for SEO improvement or any of that stuff. We literally just want you to buy our product wholesale, manage our PPC, and keep an eye on the competition. That way we don't have to.
Right. I mean, is that the case that some brands just don't want to deal with the hassle of, the e-commerce side of business?
100%.
Because it seems crazy to me because, of the literally billions of dollars that are being spent, not just on Amazon, but on Walmart, all these obscure marketplaces around the globe, that a company goes, you know what? I don't want to pay my $40 a month and my 15% commission to Amazon. When they might, I don't get it. Why are companies so adverse to that kind of?
Well, it's not that they don't want to be on Amazon, right? And a lot of brands are still obviously managing themselves. I'm talking about the small private label brand, and maybe not even small necessarily from a revenue size, but small from a team size. Maybe if it's, the founder and one other person or two other people. And again, they're looking to grow their personal business portfolio. They have other opportunities that they want to focus on, and their bandwidth just isn't enough to also handle Amazon.
Got it.
Right. So that's the kind of person I'm looking for when it comes to a private label brand.
Right. It's this kind of thing, I speak to a lot of Amazon sellers, and we speak about, using VAs or, outsourcing and things like that, where essentially what does that do? It allows you to focus on the things that you're good at and things that you want to do. And so if you're a brand and you're good at product development, and that's what you want to do, and that's your superpower, it makes sense that you would outsource that kind of activity.
100%.
And so that's essentially where y'all fit in.
Exactly. Yeah. So a brand that's focusing on product development, on sourcing, on the IP, on that, communicating with factories. And then they're like, all right, we did all this work. Now you just buy that product in bulk and then handle selling it on Amazon.
And so, in terms of somebody who's listening to this, maybe they have a couple of years of Amazon under their belt, maybe a bit of arbitrage, maybe they have a couple of wholesale relationships that they can also leverage and use as reference. What would you say to those people if they're trying to kind of make that approach to brands and do something similar? What should they be looking out for, and how can they kind of take the first step in that direction?
Yeah, the first thing I always say is just reach out to all the brands you've already sold, right? One of our brand direct relationships that we have right now came from a product that we sold through online arbitrage in the summer of last year. And I realized, I was like, this is just a great wholesale opportunity. And I know that I can help them. Like, I have an actual value pitch. So let's just keep reaching out. So I reached out to them a couple times over like 5-6 months, and then got on the phone with someone, had a pretty good call, and we got them enrolled in the transparency program, and it's only up from here, right? So
Yeah.
all the brands that you've already sold, that's going to be the easiest place to start with, because you also have sales data for those brands internally. So you know that, that it sells, and you've also looked at their listings and you know kind of what the patterns are. And then when it comes to outreach, I mean, look, there's so many ways you can be creative. Obviously, cold outreach, you can, use Keep a Product Fire, you can use Smart Scout, you can use tools like that to find brands that fit the criteria that you're looking for, but also like your in-person network. You'll be surprised how many people might have small brands, or when you're shopping, brands you might not recognize. Look them up, see if they're on Amazon, see what they're doing. Just always keep your mind open to different opportunities. And then the other thing that I like to say as well is, especially for newer sellers, I find a lot of people are intimidated by trying to get brand direct and getting the exclusive, which it can be intimidating. And I think I can also take the amount of knowledge I have from private label for granted. But on the flip side, if it's something obvious, like their listing just doesn't have enough pictures and not enough bullet points, like any seller can recognize that and can provide that value to a brand.
Yeah. And I guess that there's always something, I realized recently that, if you walk into a supermarket in anywhere in different parts of the country, they all have like a local section, and they're all, and grocery is a different animal because perishables is a tough area to live in. But, you could even, if we go back to my previous example of like loving outdoors gear, you walk in, you go on a snowboarding trip and you walk into the local outfitter, they'll have like all your big brands. They'll have your North Face and Burtons and stuff, but then they're like, then you see this beanie from this company you've never heard of. They have a cool logo, and they're like, oh yeah, that's that from like a local shop. And so those are the kinds of opportunities that, they might not have the footprint in like the larger e-commerce space.
100%.
And they might not even know that they have a market there.
Yep, totally. So you just got to always keep your eyes peeled.
Yeah. And I think that idea of having, being able to leverage your experience in Amazon is a big one for these companies, because sometimes it's just, if we're talking about the snowboarding space and a cool beanie, sometimes it's just a bunch of dudes that like wanted to make a beanie brand for them and all the homies, and they didn't realize that people were actually going to buy it. And now, now it picks up steam, and that's how things happen. It's really, really fun, especially in that kind of particular space, to see that.
100%.
One of the questions, I had a follow-up question from something you said earlier. You said that one of your, like the current projects that you're working on, you reached out a couple of times, and within 5 or 6 months you had an answer and you started to deal with them. In your experience, 6 months, is that fast? Is it slow? Should I expect to do that? Should I expect more? Should I expect less? Especially when I'm trying to approach brands and get a deal kicked off like that?
Yeah, building a relationship directly with a brand to where you're going to be able to successfully pitch going exclusive with them is going to take time. So, because a lot of things have to line up. One is timing. The timing has to work for the brand. 2 is trust, right? No brand is just going to go exclusive off the bat with some random seller that they don't really know, especially if you haven't been purchasing from them. And if they do go exclusive with you off the bat, they're probably not going to be a very good brand. And then 3 is convincing them of the value of going exclusive. So with the one brand that I mentioned earlier, where that cycle was, I guess, probably 5 or 6 months from when I initially reached out to them about it, is it just took a while for me to explain to them the benefits of going exclusive, because they've sold on Amazon themselves in the past and they stopped doing that. Then they had a bunch of resellers, and most of their revenue comes through their own website. So they weren't really focusing on Amazon. They were focusing on their own website. But I kind of broke it down multiple times through email. Like I said, was able to get on the phone with a decision maker. We probably talked for half an hour, and then he finally kind of like understood my perspective in terms of how I was pitching the exclusive and why it would be valuable to them, not just to me. And then once that clicked for him, then it was like, okay, let me place an order, which right now we're just selling through at break even. But again, to kind of build that relationship. And then as we get other sellers off the listing and pricing gets back to where we want it to be, then it'll be profitable for us and for them. So yeah, it's going to take a while, and it depends. I mean, I know I haven't had a sales cycle this long yet because I haven't been reaching out directly to brands for this long, but I know other people who they've been reaching out to a brand for years, and then they finally got the account and then the exclusive. Sometimes it might fall in your lap sooner. It could be quick, but on average, it's probably going to be a few months minimum.
And so in terms of this particular deal, you said that most of the revenue comes through their .com site. Do you expect Amazon to take a bigger chunk out of that in terms of their revenue? Do you expect to surpass their .com on Amazon, or do you expect it to just be a large revenue stream for them kind of moving forward?
I don't know exactly what their .com revenue is. I didn't get that numbers from them, but I would not be surprised at all if Amazon surpassed, just because of the category that they're in and the kind of product that they have and how poorly optimized they are right now.
Sure.
I would not be surprised at all if Amazon surpassed.
Yeah, because I'd kind of expect, a brand who has their own website, is selling through their own website and other channels, to be worried about Amazon cannibalizing, their other efforts. Like, does that come up in conversation, and how do you kind of approach that with these brands?
Yes, so we've talked about that. And I think one of the reasons why they didn't want to pursue Amazon too much themselves after they started having resellers and other issues with pricing is because Amazon doesn't give as much of that customer data directly to the brand. But at the end of the day, I mean, once the margin is there and the cash flow is easier, it's like money talks.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I always, when you come from the space, you have all of these like different ways of, also being a consumer.
Right.
Like, if I don't need something in 2 days, I'll happily click view other sellers, and I'll go get an FBA item or an FBM item that saves me $3.
Right.
Because I don't care.
Yeah.
And I think about that from like the brand standpoint as well. Even private label products, oftentimes you see on Amazon is not the cheapest price. You can go direct to the brand and they have a slightly cheaper price, free shipping. And then if you drop them your email, they'll give you another 10% off.
Right. Exactly.
And so it's really fun. It's like really interesting to hear how brands are making these decisions in order to be on Amazon, to not be on Amazon, where they're going to what baskets they're going to put their eggs in, because obviously they make more money on their .com site because of fees.
Yep.
But it sounds like in a lot of these scenarios, they can't afford to not be on Amazon.
100%. The amount of customer traffic on Amazon is just going to absolutely crush however much traffic they're getting on their .com website. And it's a much more kind of old school brand, in terms of how they operate. And so I didn't really catch the vibe that they're putting a lot of effort into the marketing side of things. So they kind of have a loyal customer base that buys the product because it's a consumable product. So they're buying the product regularly.
And there's rebuys.
But there's so much opportunity for them on Amazon.
I kind of love that for those kinds of brands. I love supporting, small businesses.
Yep.
I think that there's something about, quality that's really cool. Oftentimes there's they have these specific missions and visions that, resonate with me. Back to outdoor brands, some of these companies give percentages back to different federations that support,
environmental efforts
and things like that. I love that. And so I think that there's something that's really interesting about these guys that are kind of old school, that it's look, you could, you're partially doing this because you need to pay bills and live your life and do that whole thing. But you also have this kind of like your side quest of, raising money for environmental efforts. And we could be doing that all bigger, faster, better, stronger, by leveraging the marketplaces. I think that's also a really cool way to kind of approach the idea of consulting and working with these businesses.
100%. Yep.
So Kaj, as we kind of wrap up this episode, we spoke a bit about, what it means to, try to find brands to work with and find areas to improve. I guess I have two questions for you as we kind of wrap up. The first one is, what do you see in terms of brands and private label and this kind of business that we're talking about, what do you see that looking like over the next, year, 2 years and beyond? And then the second question is, with that kind of prediction, what is your advice to newcomers in this specific business model and succeeding over the next few years?
Yeah. So part of the reason why, right? So like you said in the beginning, we've done private label, retail arbitrage, online arbitrage, wholesale arbitrage, wholesale brand direct. We've kind of had experience with all of those different models. And one of the reasons why right now we're doubling down on that wholesale brand direct is I think there is, one, a ton of opportunity there. And two, compared to arbitrage, you are able to build long-term relationships with these brands. Whereas when you're doing arbitrage, whether it's wholesale, retail, online, every product has a life cycle of between a week and a year. About some wholesale arbitrage products, you're going to be able to sell profitably for a lot longer than that. But a lot of products the life cycle is going to be kind of in that range, depending on which model you're doing. When you're partnering directly with a brand, you're able to build a relationship that can last a year plus, 3 years, 5 years, hopefully 10 years. And you can also build it in such a way that you have actual enterprise valuable and it's sellable. Like you put a contract with a transferability clause in there with the brand. And then even though you didn't do all of the work to build the brand itself, you actually have something that's sellable like it would be with private label. So it's kind of bringing together some of the wholesale side with the private label, but doing it in a way that I think you can scale a little bit faster than you can just with private label.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And it's like, it really helps to really picture it as the transition from, I don't want to call one arbitrage or retail arbitrage not real business, but real sustainable business in terms of longevity.
And the reason for that, and this is kind of the underlying thinking behind that pivot for us, is when you're doing arbitrage, you're not actually providing value to the marketplace. You are finding a gap in the marketplace and filling it, which I mean, in a way is providing value to the customer so that way they can get the product. Mm-hmm. But we all know that we're taking advantage of a discrepancy in the market. And by nature of how the market works, that discrepancy is going to correct over time. Versus when you're partnering with a brand, you're actually providing value, strengthening relationship. Again, something that can last for a year, 5 years, 10 years.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I once had a conversation with a friend who also works in the space, and he argued that, the arbitrageurs are essentially, in some aspect, really work for Amazon in terms of just finding supply. Whereas the brands are, creating products and product lifecycle. Yeah. Because there is a need for the arbitrageurs. Bad example is Amazon wants Dial soap on their marketplace, right? They sell thousands, if not tens of thousands or 100,000s of, bottles and ounces of literally dish soap and hand soap every year. And so they want it. And if there's not enough, if they can't get enough through Vendor Central and through their contacts selling on as Amazon.com, they want the third party sellers to sell it, and they don't care whether it's from a wholesale model or if somebody picks up, a box from Walmart with coupons. They don't care. So it's quite the interesting take on that.
Yeah. And arbitrage will always be around. There will always be an arbitrage opportunity. There have been for hundreds of years, and I'm pretty sure there will be for hundreds of years. And it just depends on what you want to do, right? Like, again, right now I'm thinking of how can we get to 8 figures and how can we do that sustainably and safely. And for us, that's mainly going to be through brand direct relationships. I still do some arbitrage, placed a pretty big order for an arbitrage product via a wholesale distributor. I'm not lacking arbitrage at all. I'll probably still be doing it for a while. But in terms of scalability, I think working directly with brands is the way to go.
I love that. Amazing. Kaj, I wanted to thank you so much for coming and sharing about your really interesting journey, starting from the private label side in a YouTube video and then moving into arbitrage and wholesale, and then really leveraging everything you learned along the way for, brand direct partnerships. Thanks so much for sharing with us.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you having me on, and it was a fun conversation.
And there you have it. Kaj Robinson, he took his own path to get to where he is today in terms of building his own business and finding ways to be successful in the marketplace. Hope you learned something today, and we'll catch you next time.